Welcome to Aging on the Suncoast. I'm your host, Jason Martino. The United States Department of Justice reports that 1 in 10 seniors aged 60 and over will experience some form of abuse. Even more startling is about 1 out of every 23 cases of abuse go unreported. Unfortunately, seniors who are victims of abuse are more likely to be institutionalized or hospitalized than those who have not been abused. This month's show is intended to illustrate elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. While the topics are not positive in nature, our intent is to inform our viewers that this is real and it affects the lives of our most vulnerable. To help us understand these issues, we're fortunate to have with us Sherry Clester with the Area Agency on Aging of Pasco and Pinellas Counties, Anna Marie Millette with Pinellas County Consumer Protection, and Mike Mahoney with the Florida Department of Children and Families. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
It's not the first time you've been with us.
It's not.
Yeah. Mike, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, we're going to cover a topic today that's not a real pleasant one, but it's an important one. So we want to cover as much information that we possibly can today. And I think a good way to start out the show is let's just talk about terminology a little bit. Mike is an employee with the Department of Children and Families. How does the state define abuse?
All right, well, we have no shortage of definitions in our Florida statutes. And abuse is defined specifically in Chapter 415 of the Florida statutes for anyone watching that wants to memorize all our definitions. Abuse, we'll talk about the key points of abuse and what that is, of elder abuse. So it's a willful act or a threatened act by somebody specific. It has to be a caregiver or a household member or a relative of a vulnerable adult. And this willful act or threat of harm has to create some harm to the victim. Vulnerable adult is another important definition. The Department of Children and Families can only investigate abuse to a vulnerable adult, and essentially that's defined in statute as someone who has an impairment, a qualifying impairment, either a diagnosed medical condition or the inability to conduct their daily living activities, at least a certain daily living activity.
Yeah, it's important to really define the parameters at which you work in too, and that's why we wanted to cover the terminology piece of that as well. More terminology, we hear the term and we take it pretty serious, is the term neglect and also self-neglect. Can you help us distinguish what the difference is between both of those?
Sure. Obviously, neglect is when something's not happening that should happen. In the statute, it defines it as a failure or omission on the part of a caregiver. So for the department to investigate this, we have to determine that it's a caregiver that has neglected the vulnerable adult. We have what we call second-party neglect, and we have self-neglect. Second-party neglect is when your caregiver is failing to provide for your needs, your care, your supervision. Self-neglect, which is maybe a third of our reports in Pinellas, Pasco County, is when the vulnerable adult doesn't have anybody helping them. They just aren't taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
That's we'll talk later, I think, about community partners. That's where our partners come into play. They might need help to ensure that their own needs are met. They may not be able to remain safely at home. We try everything we can to keep people in their home, though. But the distinction is somebody else may not be caring for you properly, and you may not be caring for you properly.
Right, and we see both of those instances with the Area Agency on Aging. I'm not surprised to hear that about 33% of the cases in Pinellas County and maybe Pasco as well
Yes.
Deal with self-neglect, and that's the population that we generally try to target to make sure that we can have some type of service provider in there to reduce any harm that's on there. Last term, let's talk about exploitation. That's
Sure.
The other third topic that we're going to talk about today. How does the state see exploitation?
Exploitation is half a page of definition in the Florida statute, so we'll talk about some key points to that one too. To exploit someone, you either have to stand in a position of trust and confidence, to that vulnerable adult. And to exploit them, you either have to use deception or intimidation. That's somebody specific. That might be a relative, or that might be a power of attorney, someone of that nature. You can also exploit somebody if you know that they lack what we call the capacity to consent. That's known by a lot of different terms. The term that we use is capacity to consent. That might be competency to some people. It might be, well, that's essentially, capacity is the word that's often used. You can also exploit somebody if you know that they lack the capacity to consent and you still try to deprive them of assets or property. That could be out in the community, whereas trust and confidence is more people close to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to talk about exploitation, I think, on the second segment of the show, and we're going to concentrate our efforts on understanding a little bit more about abuse and neglect. And we'll start with Sherry, a friend of mine from the Area Agency on Aging and someone that I've worked with and admired for a very long time. Tell us a little bit about the different types of abuses out there, and if you want to elaborate on any kind of telltale signs, that's totally appropriate.
Sure, Jason. There's many types of abuse, obviously. There's physical, there's emotional or psychological. Just like Mike mentioned, there's neglect, financial abuse, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the second segment. But for physical abuse, some of the indicators of physical abuse that a senior might have are welts, they may have bruising, and this is usually like unexplained bruising. Right. If they say they fell down the stairs, but they've done it 2 or 3 times within the last week, that's why they have multiple bruises. That is a big red flag. Also, sometimes they'll have burns, such as cigarette burns or ligature marks for being tied up. There's many different indicators for physical abuse. There's also the situation where you can actually, a senior may report to you that they are being physically harmed, and you need to take that seriously. Because if they're opening up and telling you that they're being physically abused, they are probably, confiding in you, and you need to report that.
It's a cry for help.
Yes, it is a cry for help. Also, a lot of times they might fear their caregiver. If you see that a caregiver is around a senior or a vulnerable adult and they're acting afraid, that's a good indicator as well that they might be physically harmed by that caregiver.
Yeah, and I guess I'm assuming that not all forms of abuse come directly from a caregiver. It could be another family member, it could be a neighbor taking advantage of that person too, right?
Absolutely. So that's a little bit about the physical abuse. We'll talk a little bit now about emotional or psychological abuse. Some of the indicators for emotional or psychological abuse include if they become withdrawn from normal activities. Let's say they used to go visit their neighbor all the time and have a cup of coffee, but now all of a sudden they aren't going and they're making all these excuses. A lot of times the senior, they used to be happy and content, but now they seem to be sad or depressed. A lot of times they have a low self-esteem, and this is over time, like it's just something that is not normal. So somebody on the outside can actually see that this is happening. That would be a red flag as well. Another thing that you would actually see for emotional or psychological abuse is actually if you're visiting with the senior, if the caregiver that's in the home or whoever's taking care of the vulnerable adult is actually talking negatively to the senior, if they're saying demeaning things to the senior, that would be an example of emotional or psychological abuse.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you elaborating on that a little bit. It sickens me to hear the examples of what victims have to deal with, and that's why we're doing this show today, to really open up some folks' eyes that may see things like this and not know what outlets they have to pursue after that.
Right.
So we talked a little bit about the telltale signs of victims, tentative potential victims, and so let's talk a little bit about the actual abusers out there. What are some of the characteristics that you run across or that you know from your experience?
Right. And characteristics of abusers, there have been studies out there that 90% of abusers are actually family members or caregivers, which is very scary to know, because that is, the person that you trust if, it's a family member or caregiver. Besides family member or caregivers, usually it's an institutional person, somebody that's taking care of somebody at like an ALF, or if they're somewhere at like a senior center, somebody caring for them. Mike, do you have anything else?
Sure. I actually brought some of the statistics. So over the last year, that percentage, that 90%, is pretty accurate. Over 40% of our abuse cases, the alleged perpetrator is a son or a daughter. That's almost half the time that's who it's going to be. Wow. Then you have much smaller percentages of other family members, and rarely is it somebody from an institution. We do separate our investigations by in-home or institutional. So we're talking about our in-home investigations, really. And then in a facility, it's almost always an employee. almost always is the alleged perpetrator.
Yeah.
In a nursing home or an assisted living facility. The percentage that stands out is about 42% in Circuit 6, Pinellas, Pasco County. It's a little higher actually in Pasco, around 46%. It's a son or a daughter usually.
That's right. It's hard for me to even fathom that.
Very sad. Yeah.
All right, so we learned a little bit about characteristics. We learned a little bit about the types of abuse victim experiences in there too. Do all these cases get reported, or do we have a notion? I mentioned in the monologue that there's quite a statistic in there, 1 out of 23, I think I said, about unreported types of cases. Is that the same for Pasco and Pinellas County?
Actually, I just saw a statistic the other day that about 4% of the population in Florida has a report made to the hotline about them, but it's significantly higher in Pinellas County, around 1 out of 5.
Wow.
Maybe that's because of the work that we're doing
Perhaps.
to do the outreach and the public education behind that.
And I do have some current statistics for the last year.
Sure.
So in statewide, reports to the abuse hotline, 45,625 as of Wednesday,
Wow.
2 days ago.
Wow.
In Pasco County, 1,339, and in Pinellas County, 3,196. So in Circuit 6, Pinellas, Pasco County, 4,535 reports.
I wish there was just zero.
Fiscal
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
Not because it's underreported, but because there was no instances of that even occurring.
And we are coming to the end of our fiscal year, so that's about for a year.
Okay. Let's talk about, so if somebody suspects or they are a victim of abuse, what do they do? What are their outlets?
Well, for a long time, the primary method to make a report was to call the Florida Abuse Hotline. So it never closes, ever. 1-800-96-ABUSE, which is, I think we're 1-800-962-2873.
Okay, we're going to run some graphics a little bit
That's
later.
excellent. And then we've gotten modern, so you can also fax in your report. You can go to our website and make the report. So you can fax it, go online, call, and we never close.
Nice. Let's talk about mandatory reporters. In
Sure.
our field, we know what that is, but does the public know what that is?
Well, everybody in the state of Florida, per Florida statute, is a mandatory reporter for elder abuse and child abuse.
Okay.
So that means that anybody that suspects it does need to make that report.
All right. And one final thing, while we're starting to lose a little time here, is what should someone bring to the table when they actually make a call to the 1-800-96-ABUSE number?
Yes, we do refer to that person as the reporter. So, and it's important that everyone knows that anyone who makes a report to the Florida Abuse Hotline has anonymity. That information is protected. We never disclose the identity of the reporter. They should be prepared to provide the hotline counselor with the name of the individual, the names of the individuals involved, the victim, alleged perpetrators. Where they're located is extremely important. We need to know if they actually have any hearing impairments, if there's any dangers at the location that the investigator needs to be aware of. Investigators they need to know what they're going into. Investigators have been hurt before by not knowing things that were important. It's also important to document any other sources that might help the investigator make decisions, who the doctor is, family members that might have information.
Sherry, we're going to see you for the second
Yes.
segment of the show. Mike, we really appreciate you coming in and talking to us today about DCF's role in, unfortunately, in elder abuse and exploitation and neglect. And we thank you for coming here today.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Please stay with us while we take a short break. As usual, don't forget to have a pen or a pencil ready. During the break and at the end of our show, we'll be running contact information for the various local resources. When we come back, we'll explore the issue of elder exploitation.
Elder abuse is always devastating, but it may not always be obvious. Isolation, coercion, and the withholding of medication are only a few of the more subtle forms of elder abuse that occur every day to thousands of our senior citizens. Please join me in the fight to end elder abuse. Our elders deserve better. Visit the website of the National Center on Elder Abuse. It's time to speak up.
During the first segment of today's show, we talked about elder abuse and neglect. We now understand what to look for and how to report it. During the second half of the show, we're bringing back Sherry Clester from the Area Agency on Aging and welcoming Anna Marie Millette from Pinellas County Consumer Protection. So let's examine elder exploitation and the resources available within the community. Sherry, welcome back to the second segment of the show.
Thank you.
And Anna Marie, welcome to Aging on the Suncoast. We're glad to have you here today.
Glad to
I've
be
worked
here.
with you in many facets outside in the community, and now we get to talk a little about some of the nitty-gritty of what you do today. Earlier in the show, Mike Mahoney from the Department of Children and Families, he defined abuse and neglect, and then he also defined what exploitation is. And we're going to take a little time today in the second segment to talk about exploitation. So what examples of exploitation are out there? What do you see out there, Sherry?
Sure. Well, I can talk about exploitation, but I just wanted to mention also that seniors control 70% of the wealth in the nation. So that's what makes them the prime target for financial exploitation. So going into some examples of financial exploitation that seniors face, sometimes if it's by a trusted party, what will happen is a family or caregiver, sometimes they will coerce or they will deceive the vulnerable adult into signing a will or a contract or other financial documents that, in other words, if the senior or vulnerable adult had capacity, they would not do. So that would be an example. Some other examples would be that the caregiver or family member is stealing their money, their property, without the knowledge or consent of the vulnerable adult. And then also there's other ways. There are sometimes businesses that financially exploit seniors. I actually had a case once where a lady, she had dementia, a really bad case of dementia, and she hired a lawn company. What happened was they were coming on a regular basis because they knew she had dementia. And when I say a regular basis, I'm talking about every 2 days. So they knew that she would pay in cash. So every time that they would show up, they'd say, okay, you know, you owe this much money, and she would pay without knowing that they just came 2 days ago and did the same work.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
No one's grass grows every 2 days.
Exactly.
That sounds like a prime example of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Well, what you've outlined for us. Let's talk a little bit about the financial exploitation piece, Anna Marie. What are some of the telltale signs that you see in Pinellas County about financial exploitation?
Oftentimes, change in the bank account or actions on the bank if they're writing more checks than normal. If somebody all of a sudden is accompanying the senior to the bank that normally they would come by themselves. Also, if they're now gifting money or making large loans. Oftentimes with somebody unfamiliar, they may give a sad story of how they need money and if this person could help them out, so they feel bad and they lend them money, but never to be paid back. If it's somebody in a trusted position such as a caregiver and they do have control of the assets but they're not providing for that senior's needs, medication, food, if repairs need to be made so it's a safe environment in the house, then where is that money going?
Yeah, those are all things that we hope that people observe out there. Back in the first segment when we talked about abuse and neglect, it was real clear to us that and what we try to express to the public is that there are outlets for them to call and report. 1-800-96-ABUSE on there. Is Pinellas County Consumer Protection also another outlet that somebody can report exploitation, or if they have been exploited or if they perceive somebody else has been?
Definitely, because oftentimes what we see is when a complaint is reported to us, it's for one issue. But when we start to investigate it, there's many layers or facets to it that even the consumer may not be aware of it. Maybe it was a home solicitation, maybe it was unlicensed contractor, and that's when we often see that there was exploitation, where the initial complaint may be, I got overcharged, or they charged me too much, or they haven't finished the work. So again, through the investigation, we often find that there may have been exploitation, so definitely file with us.
Okay. And Pinellas County Consumer Protection obviously is in Pinellas County. The show airs in Pasco County. That's also the jurisdiction for Area Agency on Aging. For folks that living in Pasco County, what outlet do they have if they are a victim of exploitation, or if they perceive somebody is a victim of that?
Well, if they dealt with a company or an individual here in Pinellas County, they can contact us. Anybody's welcome to call us. We do have investigators that handle the calls to see what the actual basis of the complaint is and how they can be best assisted. Law enforcement is an avenue, and then if they have the means and the capability, they can always go through civil matters through court.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about how consumer protection helps out an individual. Let's just, an example would be that I felt that I was exploited by, let's say, a lawn care company, and I had enough, or I finally figured it out, and I was able to make a decision to call, and I call your agency. What would I expect?
Well, what we have is different departments that handle our complaints. We handle business consumer disputes, so when an individual has a problem with a company or an individual they've done business with, they can file a complaint with us. It does need to be in writing. Initially, we're going to send it out to whoever you filed the complaint against, so it's not going to be anonymous. They will receive a copy of the complaint, and we ask them to respond back in writing. Once it's been assigned to an investigator, that investigator will be in touch with both parties, either to do mediation through a civil complaint, or we have a criminal section that works with the parties, and we have assistant state attorneys assigned to our department for prosecution.
I'm glad you made that distinction between anonymity. When a report is made to the Department of Children and Families, that report is confidential, and the person who made that report, the reporter, is everything is anonymous like that. But that's what I hear a little different from your piece of it, and I think it's a good distinction for our public to know. When we were talking with Mike, what we weren't able to cover is that the Department of Children and Families, as well as Pinellas County Consumer Protection, as well as the VOCA program with the AAA, can't do this work alone. I assume that you all work together in a parallel situation to solve the goal, or try to resolve the issue at hand. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Many times I do work with victims of crime, mainly of elder abuse or exploitation, anything like that. And what happens is I actually can help seniors in the reporting process. If they feel that they want to make an elder abuse report to the hotline, I can help them do that if they're too afraid to do it alone. If they wanted to make a police report, I can actually help them file a police report as well. I can actually call the police department, tell them the allegations, be at their home with them to make them feel more comfortable. And then the same thing goes for consumer protection. I can actually help them fill out the report. Usually it's a report that they fill out. Some seniors don't even have the ability to write, so I can actually fill it in for them, whatever they are reporting. Yeah,
it just seems like you two ladies are uber advocates for the folks that are being victims, or at least alleged victims in that too. I want to go back to consumer protection a little bit. We talked about some of the expectations that if a person were to file an allegation of something like that, what is going to happen. So let's say that you take the case because you think that things can be substantiated. What can a resident expect when they have an active case with your organization?
Well, if it is involving exploitation, it is going to be with our criminal section. Cases do take time, so we do ask patience of the consumer, but at any point they can contact their investigator. We need to gather all the documentation. We have to start from square one. Unfortunately, the consumer or the senior has already gone through it, but we have to start from square one, get all the documentation, subpoena records, talk to the individuals, witnesses, victims, to gather statements. So it does take some time. But like I said, you have an individual that is assigned to your case and can update you at any point, or will contact you should they need additional information. So they work with you throughout the process.
It sounds like quality over quantity.
We try to be.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of cases that you've dealt with in the recent future? I know that scams, for one thing, they change all the time. I mean, you hear some similarities between scams, but anything currently going on that you know of that people could be aware of?
Well, at any point, I always tell seniors that times have changed. So your salespeople that are calling on the telephone, your door-to-door salesmen, they're not what they used to be. 99% of the time now it's going to be some kind of scam. If there's an opportunity there or some vulnerability, they're going to take advantage of that. So it's best just to not answer your door if you don't know who's there, or to answer the calls, because once they take advantage of you, they'll continue to take advantage of you. So it's best that, you know, they not, and if they have any concerns or questions, they think it may be legitimate, might be the IRS calling, might be their bank calling, please give us a call and we'll be happy to discuss it with them, because we can usually tell the difference between the scam and the legitimate calls that they're receiving.
That's awesome. Sherry, I heard you speak to a small group not too long ago, and out of the 20 people I think that were there, I heard 2 of them, and they were older individuals, female, mentioned that they were duped by an organization or a caller calling to say that their computers were infected, and the only way to take the infection off of their computer is to obviously hand over the money that they had so they can fix what was going on there. And I don't know if ID was part of it or not too. It seems to be never a dull moment when it comes to people trying to exploit or take advantage of the next person out there.
That is so true. And what I'm seeing with the police departments, what they're warning seniors at this point is mainly of the IRS scam. And what that is seniors or anybody are getting phone calls and somebody on the other line is stating that they are with the IRS and that this person owes back taxes. And if they don't pay these back taxes, then they're going to be arrested. So what happens is they're using these high pressure and tactics to get the person to send money immediately. And if you hear that immediacy on the phone, that's a big red flag that it's probably a scam.
Yeah.
So the best thing is to not even answer these calls, first of all, but if you do, you can just hang up.
Yeah, well, that's good. Sometimes it's a good thing we have caller ID anyway.
Yes.
I think I don't answer my phone more than I answer my phone nowadays, just because of those things. So if a person was being served by Anna Marie's organization, or even in touch with the Department of Children and Family for abuse or neglect or exploitation, how are they getting a hold of you? Do they go through the senior helpline, which we obviously have information for?
Yes, if they were to call the Area Agency on Aging, the senior helpline, they would be able to reach me. A lot of times I do get referrals from law enforcement on cases where there are victims that need help. Anna Marie's in contact with me along with Mike and adult protection investigators to refer cases to me. And what I do is I do help the victims through the criminal justice process. I will go to court with them. I help people get injunctions for protection. I can do anything in regards to going to court with a victim, keeping them update on cases and stuff like that.
Nice. I think we have a little bit of time left, but I know that we have this is an important month when it comes to abuse. Do you want to make an announcement?
Sure. Every year on June 15th, what we do is we celebrate World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So this year, June 15th of 2016, the goal is every single year to raise awareness about elder abuse. So that's what we're doing here. We're talking about elder abuse to educate the community about elder abuse and to be aware that these issues are occurring and how to report. So that's the importance of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, and that's why we're talking about it today.
Yes, we sure are, and I'm really glad that you ladies can come on the show. I appreciate Mike coming on the show as well. Sherry, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Anna Marie, welcome to the show. We hope to see you sometime in the near future.
Thank you.
Yeah. We hope you learned a great deal from this month's broadcast. We also hope this episode helped you understand that the issues we spoke to today are very real, and there are resources available if you are a victim or know someone who is. At the end of the show, we'll highlight those resources again, so get your pencil ready. We'll see you next month, and until then, please maximize all the opportunities life avails you.